3:55 a.m. The Baltic Sea, 41 nautical miles southwest of the Swedish island of Gotland. The water is shallow here, rarely more than 80 meters to the sandy bottom, and at this hour it is ink black and cold, 8 degrees Celsius, a steady wind from the northwest pushing a low chop across the surface. A thin overcast sits at 4,000 feet, blotting out the stars and pressing the darkness closer to the water. Visibility, 3 miles. Sea state, 2. The kind of night that makes radar the only god worth praying to. The USS Porter, DDG-78, an R. Lee Burke-class Flight 1 guided missile destroyer, holds station at 12 knots on a westerly course, her AN/ESO-PY-1D radar sweeping a 360-degree arc at the speed of light, cataloging every contact in the Baltic with mechanical indifference. She is operating as the lead air defense ship for Task Force Baltic, a NATO multinational surface action group assembled under Exercise Baltic Guardian, a scheduled alliance maritime exercise that had taken on a less than theoretical urgency following the intelligence reports of the previous 72 hours. Alongside the Porter, the German frigate FGS Saxon, the Danish frigate HDMS Iver Huitfeldt, the Dutch frigate HNLMS De Zeven Provinciën, and 2 NATO submarines running silent beneath the formation, a German Type 2-12A and a Dutch Walrus class. Together, 5 surface warships and 2 submarines, all of them networked via NATO's Link 16 tactical data network. All of them fed a common air picture from the E-3A AWACS aircraft orbiting at 25,000 feet 140 miles to the southwest over Poland. The intelligence picture had been building for 4 days. Russian aerospace forces had repositioned 2 Tu-22M3 Backfire bombers from Engels Air Base to Kaliningrad Oblast, a move that had no plausible routine exercise justification given the current political environment. Satellite imagery from 48 hours earlier had shown unusual activity at the 152nd Guards Missile Brigade at Chernyakovsk, Iskander M transporter erector launchers being repositioned from storage configuration to deployment posture. And the signals intelligence picture had shown a sharp increase in encrypted military communications traffic between Kaliningrad, the Western Military District headquarters in St. Petersburg, and the Russian General Staff in Moscow, a communications pattern that American and NATO analysts had seen before, in contexts that did not end well. The task force commander had briefed his commanding officers at 11 p.m. the previous evening. The exercise would continue. The defensive posture would be elevated. Every ship's combat system would remain in active search mode throughout the night. No MCON, maximum sensor picture, and the E-3A would stay on station until further notice. At 3:55 a.m., the E-3A's AN/APY-2 radar sees them first. Not missiles. Not yet. Aircraft. 4 tracks, appearing simultaneously from the direction of Kaliningrad, climbing through 8,000 feet on a northeast heading, turning northeast toward the Baltic. The AWACS mission crew classifies the tracks in 11 seconds. 2 Tu-22M3 Backfire bombers and 2 Su-30SM escort fighters. The track data pushes to every ship in the task force via Link 16 in the next 3 seconds. By the time the first watch officer aboard the Porter lifts his head from his display to speak, the threat picture is already on every Aegis screen in the formation. Tau, AWACS, reports 4 tracks inbound from Kaliningrad. 2 backfires, 2 Su-30SMs. Tracks are climbing, accelerating. Bearing 095, range 220 nautical miles. Stand by for weapons profile. The tactical action officer is already on his feet. He has been on his feet, with short interruptions, for the last 11 hours. Sound general quarters. All hands to battle stations. Link 16, all units. 2 backfire inbound. Assess missile launch threat. Stand by for coordinated engagement. AWACS, TAO, maintain track. The alarm sounds across the Porter and, via NATO communications, is echoed in action stations orders across the Saxon, the Iver Huitfeldt, and the De Zeven Provinciën. 5 ships transitioning to full combat readiness in under 90 seconds. The Baltic Guardian exercise has become something else entirely. At 3:57 a.m. and 40 seconds, the E-3A reports the first launch event. The backfires have released. 12 contacts, appearing below the bomber tracks, accelerating east over the Baltic Sea at low altitude. Speed building rapidly. Mach 0.7, Mach 0.8, Mach 0.9. The AWACS classifies the tracks in 7 seconds. KH-101 air-launched cruise missiles. Conventional warhead stealth cruise missiles with a range of 5,000 kilometers, a radar cross-section of 0.01 square meters. Terrain. Following navigation at 50 to 100 meters altitude and a terminal accuracy of 5 to 10 meters CEP. The KH-101 is not a weapon designed for area bombardment. It is a precision instrument designed to kill specific ships at specific coordinates, arriving at wave-top altitude from a direction and at a time that maximizes its probability of defeating close-in defensive systems. 12 KH-101s, 3 per ship in the task force. A clean, professional targeting solution. The Russians had done their homework. They had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake. The Tu-22M3 had launched at 200 nautical miles, believing that standoff range would protect them from surface-to-air missile counterfire. At 200 nautical miles, the SM-2 Block 3B missiles aboard the Porter are at the outer edge of their engagement envelope. But the Porter was not the only shooter. The HDMS Iver Huitfeldt, the Danish frigate, equipped with the Stanflex weapon system and armed with 32 SM-2 Block 3A missiles, was positioned 14 nautical miles to the north, on a bearing that put the launch aircraft directly within her optimal engagement geometry. The Danish TAO had been tracking the backfires since the E-3A's initial report and had a firing solution computed and ready. The launch event simply changed the weapon's free status. The second mistake: they did not account for the Dutch frigate De Zeven Provinciën, equipped with the Smart L long-range surveillance radar and armed with 40 SM-2 Block 3A missiles, the largest surface-to-air missile magazine in the task force. The De Zeven Provinciën had been networked into the E-3A's data feed since 11:30 p.m. and was tracking every contact in the formation's combined picture. When the KH-101s appeared, the Dutch engagement radar already had them. All 12. The third mistake: the KH-101's stealth profile, designed to defeat ground-based air defense radars optimized for high-altitude search, was significantly less effective against the combination of the E-3A's downward-looking AN/APY-2 radar and the Smart L's specialized low-observable target detection mode. The Russian stealth characterization of the KH-101 had been validated against older generation radar systems. NATO's current generation of sensors had been specifically upgraded in the years following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine to address exactly this gap. The KH-101's radar cross-section of 0.01 square meters was difficult to track. It was not impossible to track. Not for the AWACS, not for the Smart L, not for the AN/SPY-1D operating in its low RCS enhancement mode, a software upgrade that had been quietly rolled out to the Baltic-assigned destroyer force, following classified assessments of Russian cruise missile developments. The fourth mistake? They sent the Su-30SM escorts with the backfires. The Su-30SMs were carrying K-8-31P anti-radiation missiles, weapons designed to home on NATO radar emissions and destroy the ship radars before the KH-101s arrived in the terminal phase. It was a sound tactical concept. It failed because the E-3A crew saw the Su-30SM launch profiles the moment the aircraft crossed into the standoff envelope and immediately transmitted a radar emission control order to the task force. All ships reduced to minimum necessary emissions. AWACS provides sensor picture. The ships went nearly dark. The KH-31P anti-radiation missiles lost their homing targets. 4 of them continued on last known heading and impacted the sea harmlessly. The other 4 began spiraling search patterns and eventually ran out of fuel. The Su-30SMs, now stripped of their primary anti-radiation weapon effect and facing a task force with intact radars that the AWACS had kept alive through the sensor handoff, turned south and accelerated away from the engagement area. The fifth mistake was strategic. The Russian planners had designed this strike for the Baltic Guardian exercise context, an opportunity to demonstrate the ability to hold NATO maritime assets at risk and to inflict a military defeat with limited political escalation. They had not accounted for the pre-delegated weapons-free authority that the NATO Task Force commander held under Article 5 pre-authorization protocols established after 2022. The authorization to engage in self-defense required no call back to Brussels, no political consultation, no delay. The task force commander's authority was absolute, pre-delegated, and had been exercised the moment the backfires launched their missiles. The political calculation that assumed hesitation was built on a NATO that no longer existed. At 3:59 a.m., the coordinated defensive engagement begins. The Porter fires first. 8SM-2 block 3B missiles from the forward VLS cells, launching in a 12-second ripple at the 4 KH-101s assigned to the Porter's engagement sector. The SM-2 Block 3B carries a 115-kilogram blast fragmentation warhead detonated by a proximity fuse, flies at Mach 3.5 and operates in semi-active radar homing mode, guided by the ship's SPG-60 and SPG-62 fire control illuminators. The Block 3B variant adds an infrared terminal seeker that gives it look-down, shoot-down capability against sea-skimming targets. Exactly the profile of the incoming KH-101s flying at 60 meters above the Baltic surface. The HDMS Iver Huitfeldt, positioned to the north, fires 12 SM-2 Block 3 A missiles in a 17-second ripple. The Danish fire control team has assigned 3 interceptors per KH-101 in their sector, a deliberate over-assignment reflecting the difficulty of the low-altitude, low RCS engagement geometry. The Iver Huitfeldt's combat system operates the Standflex-derived Terma Seafire management software integrated with the NATO Link 16 picture. Her engagement sector covers the 3 KH-101s, assigned to the Saxon on the assumption that the German frigate's older Smart S radar would have tracking difficulty at extreme low altitude. The De Zeven Provinciën fires 16 SM-2. Block 3A missiles in a 20-second sequence. The Dutch Combat Direction System assigns her missiles against the 2 remaining sectors. The missiles assigned to the De Zeven Provinciën herself and the overflow from the Porter's sector that the Porter's magazine depth cannot fully cover. The Smart L's continuous track feed gives the Dutch fire control the best engagement geometry picture in the formation, and the De Zeven Provinciën exploits it with clinical precision, assigning interceptors based on predicted terminal approach geometry, rather than simple range priority. 36 SM-2 interceptors in the air across 3 ships, engaging 12 KH-101 cruise missiles in an overlapping fire that covers every approach sector simultaneously. At 4:01 a.m. and 14 seconds, the first SM-2 intercept occurs. 68 nautical miles northeast of the task force, at 60 meters altitude over the Baltic, the first KH-101 takes a proximity detonation from a Dutch SM-2. The missile's guidance section is destroyed by fragmentation. The KH-101's engine continues burning, but the flight profile becomes erratic. The missile pitches nose down at 60 meters altitude and impacts the sea 3 seconds later. The fragmentation from the detonation, traveling at 3,000 meters per second, also damages the adjacent KH-101 flying in trail position. The second missile's fuel tank is holed. It begins leaking, its range shrinking rapidly, and it falls into the sea 14 miles short of the task force. 2 down, 10 remaining. The SM-2 intercepts continue at 8 to 12 second intervals as each missile's computed intercept time arrives. The Porter's 8 missiles engage their assigned targets. 5 direct kills. 3 misses. The KH-101's low radar cross-section causes the semi-active illuminator to lose track in the terminal phase for 3 engagements, the missiles passing within proximity fuse range but failing to trigger. The Porter's Phalanx CIWS receives automatic track updates from the Aegis system and goes to standby acquisition mode for any leakers that reach within 6 miles. The Iver Huitfeldt's 12 missiles engage their sector. 9 kills. 3 misses, all in the same terminal engagement geometry. A narrow approach angle from the northeast, where the K1-01's flight profile puts them in the radar shadow of the sea surface at the extreme limits of the fire control illuminator's tracking capability. The De Zeven Provinciën's 16 missiles clean up. Every assigned target in her sector destroyed. And the Dutch TAO, tracking the 3 misses from the Porter and the Iver Huitfeldt sectors in real time via Link 16, has already assigned 4 additional SM-2s to the leaking tracks before the Porter or Iver Huitfeldt have declared a miss. 2 of the 3 leakers are destroyed by the Dutch intercepts at 46 and 51 nautical miles. The third, a KH-101 that survived 2 near-proximity detonations with fragmentation damage to its wing surface and a slightly degraded guidance loop, continues inbound at reduced speed, its terminal guidance intermittently interrupting as the damaged navigation system reacquires and loses the target solution. That KA-101 is inside 30 nautical miles when the German frigate FGS Saxon engages it with 2 Ram Block 2 Roland airframe missile interceptors. The Ram is a short-range fire-and-forget weapon, passive RF Hohmann in the initial phase, IR Hohmann in the terminal phase, 11-kilogram warhead, Mach 2.0. The first Ram intercepts the damaged KH-101 at 19 nautical miles. Proximity detonation. The KH-101's warhead, already structurally compromised by the previous fragmentation hits, does not complete detonation. The casing ruptures. The missile falls into the Baltic Sea, 4:04 a.m. and 33 seconds. All 12 KH-101 cruise missiles destroyed or neutralized. 0 reached the task force formation. 0 NATO casualties. 0 ship damage. The E-3A crew, orbiting calmly over Poland, transmits the post-engagement summary to NATO headquarters in Brussels and to EUCOM in Stuttgart in the same terse language they use for everything. 12 of 12 tracks destroyed. Task force is combat effective. The task force commander keys his radio at 4:05 a.m. All units, task force commander. Engagement complete. All tracks neutralized. 0 casualties. Weapons free for counterstrike package. Execute Baltic Hammer. Baltic Hammer had been built by EUCOM and NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe over the course of the previous 18 months, updated and refined as the intelligence picture on Russian Baltic capabilities evolved. It was not a contingency plan in the traditional sense, a binder on a shelf to be dusted off in a crisis. It was a living operational document, updated weekly, with current coordinates, current electronic orders of battle, and current weapons assignments for every target in the package. When the authorization to execute arrived, the plan did not need to be found. It needed only to be started. At 4:06 a.m., the USS Porter opens 20 VLS cells, 20 Tomahawk Block 5 land attack missiles climb from the aft deck in a 24-second ripple, each one transitioning from vertical launch to low-altitude terrain following cruise at 550 knots, each one carrying a joint multi-effects warhead capable of defeating 2 meters of reinforced concrete. Each one guided to within a 5-meter CEP by GPS, aided inertial navigation backed by terrain reference guidance. First target package. The Tu-22M3 launch aircraft on the ground at Kaliningrad's Chkalovsk Air Base. Both backfires had returned to base following the missile launch. Standard Russian doctrine: preserve the platform, the weapon is expendable. They were on the runway at Chkalovsk 17 minutes after the last KH-101 was launched. American signals intelligence had tracked them to the ground on their return to base. The backfires were parked at the hardened aircraft shelters on the north side of the field. 8 Tomahawks. Each hardened shelter takes 1 Block 5 penetrating warhead. The 2 Su-30 SMs that had turned south following the failure of their anti-radiation missile attack had recovered to Donskoye Air Base, also in Kaliningrad. 4 Tomahawks. Both aircraft destroyed on the ground. Second target package. The 152nd Guards Missile Brigade Iskander M deployment positions at Chernyakovsk. Satellite imagery from 6 hours before the attack, the last pass before the engagement, had shown 4 Iskander MTL vehicles in 3 separate deployment positions in the forests north of Chernyakovsk. The Iskander M carries conventional or nuclear warheads, range 500 kilometers, and had been the intelligence community's primary concern throughout the 4 days of buildup prior to this attack. The TEL positions had been surveyed by the imagery analysts to within 15 meters. 6 Tomahawks. 3 positions. 2 warheads per position. The TELs are not hardened structures. They are wheeled vehicles parked in the forest. A Block 5 warhead detonating above a TEL vehicle produces a fragmentation pattern that covers an area 300 meters in diameter. Nothing survives. Third target package. The 336th Naval Missile Brigade at Baltisk, the shore-based anti-ship missile battery equipped with BAL and Bastion mobile coastal defense systems, which had not fired in this attack but represented a standing threat to NATO surface forces operating in the western Baltic. The bow system carries Kh-35 subsonic anti-ship missiles. The Bastion carries P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles with a range of 300 kilometers and a Mach 2.5 terminal velocity. Both batteries had been identified in imagery at their deployment positions outside Baltisk 3 days ago. 6 Tomahawks on the Bastion battery, 4 on the bow battery. The coastal defense missile threat to the task force from Kaliningrad is eliminated in the same strike package that answers the backfire attack. 4th target package: the Kaliningrad Regional Air Defense Network, specifically the S-400 battery at Pionersky that had been tracking NATO aircraft throughout the exercise period, and that provided the radar coverage enabling the backfire launch aircraft to conduct their ingress and egress without fear of interception. 4 Tomahawks. The S-400 surveillance radar takes the first warhead. The engagement radar takes the second. The launcher vehicles take warheads 3 and 4. The battery goes dark at 4:08 a.m. 6F A-18E. Super Hornets from the USS Harry S. Truman, operating in the Norwegian Sea 350 nautical miles to the northwest, are already feet wet over the North Sea, pushing south at Mach 1.1, armed with AGM-158 BJASSMER standoff missiles. The Truman had been positioned in the Norwegian Sea specifically to provide long-range strike capability in the event of a Baltic escalation, a positioning decision made 72 hours earlier when the intelligence warning first arrived and the EUCOM commander authorized the carrier to assume a covert strike alert posture without announcing the reorientation. The FA-18Es reached their JASSMER release point over the southern Baltic at 4:22 a.m. and fire against 2 additional target packages that the Tomahawks cannot reach: the Russian Baltic Fleet headquarters at Baltisk, specifically the command and communications building that had coordinated the backfire strike package, and the signals intelligence facility at Yanternoyo on the Kaliningrad coast that had been feeding radar data on the NATO task force formation to the backfire targeting system throughout the night. 12 JASSMERs. Both facilities destroyed. From the E-3A's picture, 2 Su-27 fighters launched from Kaliningrad at 4:29 a.m. in a probable intercept attempt against the departing FA-18Es. 2 Polish F-16S on runway alert under Article 5 authorization are already airborne and closing from the south. The Su-27 pilots, confronted with an AIM-120D firing solution at 80 miles and the full NATO air picture on their radar warning receivers, break south and return to Kaliningrad. By 4:35 a.m., 40 minutes after the first KH-101 was launched, the Baltic Hammer counterstrike is complete. Battle damage assessment, compiled by EUCOM's Joint Intelligence Operations Center at Stuttgart and distributed to NATO headquarters by 6 a.m., is precise and categorical. Chkalovsk Air Base. Both 2 22M3 Backfire bombers destroyed in their hardened shelters. Both Su-30SM escort fighters destroyed at Donskoye Air Base. Russian Aerospace Forces long-range strike capability from Kaliningrad Oblast eliminated. 152nd Guards Missile Brigade, Iskander M positions. All 4 TEL vehicles destroyed or damaged at their deployment positions. Iskander M threat to Baltic NATO forces from Kaliningrad Oblast eliminated for the foreseeable future. 336th Naval Missile Brigade, Bastion battery destroyed, bow battery destroyed. Shore-based anti-ship missile threat from Kaliningrad eliminated. S-400 air defense battery at Pionersky. Radar destroyed. Engagement system destroyed. Baltic Fleet Headquarters Communications Building destroyed. Yantarnoy Signals Intelligence Facility destroyed. Estimated Russian military personnel killed in action, 62 to 94. Russian military assets destroyed, 2 Tu-22M3 strategic bombers, 2 Su-30SM multi-role fighters, 4 Iskander M transporter erector launchers, 1 Bastion coastal missile battery, 1 Bow coastal missile battery, 1 S-400 battery, 2 command and intelligence facilities. NATO casualties, 0. NATO ships damaged, 0. NATO aircraft lost, 0. At 4:40 a.m., the task force resumes its Baltic Guardian exercise profile. The ships hold their formation. The E-3A returns to its standard patrol orbit. The Porter's VLS cells are assessed. Forward cells at 62%, aft cells at 88%. The reload cycle is requested from the ammunition support ship positioned at Kiel, Germany. The task force will be at full VLS capacity within 16 hours. The task force commander studies the Baltic Hammer BDA. The fifth and most fundamental Russian mistake was not tactical. Not the miscalculation about the Smart L, not the anti-radiation missile failure. It was the strategic assumption of hesitation. The belief that NATO's requirement for consensus would translate into operational delay at the moment of contact. That assumption had never been tested under current pre-authorization protocols. Now it had been. 40 minutes from first launch to completed counterstrike. No contact to Brussels. No delay. In the Combat Information Center of the USS Porter, the watch relief cycle runs on schedule. The AN/SPY-1D sweeps the Baltic without pause. The E-3A's picture feeds into the Link 16 display. A cargo ship northeast of Gotland, a Swedish Coast Guard vessel, a Finnish ferry on the Helsinki route. Everything tracked. Everything catalogued. Everything known. The Baltic is open. The task force is operational. The exercise continues on its published schedule because there is no reason to deviate, and every reason to demonstrate that deviation is not something the United States Navy or its NATO allies do under pressure. The Porter's wake cuts a white line across the cold Baltic water heading west, steady at 12 knots, radar sweeping. Somewhere above the overcast, the E-3A orbits in silence. Nothing moves in this sea without permission. That has always been true. Tonight, it was demonstrated again, with the precision, the speed, and the absolute finality that has defined American and Allied naval power for the last 7 decades. Attack the Alliance, and the Alliance answers. Immediately. Precisely. Without hesitation and without mercy. The Baltic is quiet now. It will stay quiet.